2021 to 2025 session of the Tobago House of Assembly. At this sitting, Chief Secretary of Finance, Trade and the Economy, the Honorable Farley Chavez Augustine, will present a statement on the achievements of the Assembly during the fiscal year 2022 to 2023. This Thursday, June 22nd from 1:30 p.m. And as usual, you can either come in or tune in. Either way, don't miss it.
Almighty God, as we have come together to begin our meeting of the Assembly, we humbly beseech you to grant to all our members the light and guidance of your Holy Spirit, that we may wisely take counsel together and come to such decisions as shall promote your glory and the well-being of all our citizens in this our land, so that peace and happiness, truth and justice may be enjoyed by all people. Grant this for the sake of Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Members, you may be seated.
Oath of allegiance of the new member. Announcements by the presiding officer.
Honorable members, I have received requests for leave of absence from today's sitting from Assemblyman Megan Morrison, member for Mountain George Goodwood, and member for Roxborough Argyle, Assemblyman Watson Duke. The leave is granted.
Assembly bills sent back from Cabinet. Assembly laws brought back from Parliament. Petitions, papers.
Leader of Assembly Business.
Madam Presiding Officer, I stand to lay papers for the month of May on behalf of the Secretary of Finance and Chief Secretary, the Honorable Farley Chavez Augustine.
Thank you.
Presentations of report from Dispute Resolution Commission, Select Committees, Pre-Statutory Questions to Secretaries, Question for oral answers.
Leader of Assembly Business.
Madam Presiding Officer, there are 15 questions to secretaries On the order paper, 6 questions for oral answers and 9 for written responses. The executive is prepared to answer all questions for oral answers and requests a deferral for questions for written responses. Number 60, 69, and 80, as the secretaries are requesting more time to do research. And the responses to questions for written responses, number 68, 75, 76, 78, and 79, should be attached and circulated with the minutes for the last sitting. The written responses to question 82 will be circulated at the next sitting. Thank you, Madam Presiding.
Thank you, Leader of Assembly Business. Before we proceed, I'm sure all members are aware of the passing of Dr. Jefferson Davison, our first presiding officer. I would like for us to all stand and observe a minute of silence. Thank you, honorable members. You may be seated. As we proceed with the oral answers, Minority Leader.
Madam Presiding Officer, before we proceed with question number 63, question number 60 for written answer has been on the order paper now for about 6 months. Could the members kindly explain why it's taking them so long to respond?
The request was submitted to my office and the request was granted. Question 63, please.
Question number 63 to the Secretary of Tourism, Culture, Antiquities and Transportation.
Councillor Tashia Boris.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. As it relates to the Tobago Jazz Experience, the return, can the Secretary please indicate the overall estimated budget for the Tobago Jazz Experience, disaggregated by the cost to host each event, and specifically the total cost to engage international artists as opposed to the total cost being spent on local Trinidad and Tobago-based artists. As it relates to the Tobago Jazz Experience, the return, the overall estimated budget was $12,001,623. In terms of the disaggregation of costs for hosting each event, and I would like to indicate that there was some costs that were shared across all 3 nights, but the costs that I'm about to read into the records relate to infrastructure and artists spent on each night, and then I will give a breakdown of the costs that were across the 3 nights. So at the international night, infrastructure cost was $1,431,000. Artists, $2,421,000. Speyside Jazz infrastructure, $783,800. Artist cost, $746,900. Gospel night infrastructure, $294,550, and artist cost, $485,000. The additional expenses to host the jazz across all 3 nights: production costs, $803,050. Logistics, $2,278,323. Marketing, $1.2 million. Accommodation, $902,000. Transportation, $270,000. Airfare, $330,000. And temporary workers, $56,000. Pertaining to the breakdown of costs to engage the various international artists, the grand total to do such was $3.8 million, $3,860,155.83, and that was to engage 8 international acts. The cost to engage local Trinidad and Tobago acts was $406,289.24. Thank you.
Follow-up question?
Yes. So just to be clear, when you look at the cost for international as opposed to local, we spent 400, our local people only benefited from $406,000.
Can I have a question, please?
And I'm asking, who is this jazz really to benefit? Who are the persons who are to really benefit from this jazz if we are having a situation where the bulk of the money is being spent outside of Tobago?
Councillor Boris.
Madam Presiding Officer, I'm unsure as to what the minority leader wants me to answer to his question, because the international jazz experience did not begin with this administration. It has been taking place for the last 11 years on the island of Tobago, and the understanding is that this event was created to boost our tourism sector, to be an addition to our events festival tourism product, to ensure that we invite persons to the shores of Tobago to enjoy sun, sand, sea, and music. The real beneficiaries of the Tobago jazz experience are not necessarily the local acts that would be on stage, but more importantly, those beneficiaries will be the hotels, the guest houses, the restaurants, the car rentals, the bars, all of these persons who benefit from people coming to Tobago to experience the Tobago jazz. I hope I've answered your question.
Madam Presiding Officer.
Follow-up, Minority Leader.
Yes, please, because if what the Secretary is saying holds true, then I would like the Secretary to tell us how many persons came and what was the average spend so that we can see returns on investment, because here it is, $12 million is being spent and we are being told that the return is supposed to be seen in arrival. So how many persons came and how much money did they spend and what was the total overall revenue?
Madam Presiding Officer, unfortunately, I do not have that information at hand to be able to answer that question. The minority leader is welcome to submit that question for written or oral response at the next sitting, and I would be happy to provide that information for him.
This information is not for the minority, but for the people of Tobago, and therefore you have an opportunity to put it out there.
Question, Minority Leader.
Madam Presiding Officer, I'm seeing $1.2 million for marketing, but this jazz was only launched a month before, so I want to know where did this $1.2 million spend?
Councillor Boris.
So as it relates to the marketing figure, I do not have a breakdown as to that spend across digital marketing and traditional media channels. Again, you can submit that question for response, and I will
Minority
be able
Leader.
to get that
Minority
information
Leader.
for you.
Councillor Boris,
and
please
provide
sit.
it.
I won't have any of that today. You ask a question, allow the member to answer in her entirety, please. Councillor Boris, were you complete? Councillor Boris?
Madam Presiding Officer, as I indicated, I am more than happy to provide that information to the minority leader once he submits a question for me to answer.
Question 64. Minority Leader.
Question 64 to the Secretary of Tourism, Culture, Antiquities and Transportation.
Councillor Boris.
As it relates to the recently held Carnival in February, can the Secretary indicate when service providers will be paid? Service providers have already been paid to the tune of $7,697,001.02. There is an outstanding balance to be paid, and we are working assiduously to ensure that those outstanding balances are cleared in the shortest possible time.
Follow-up minority.
Can the Secretary outline who are those categories of persons still outstanding to be paid and how much?
Councillor Boris.
Madam Presiding Officer, unfortunately, I do not have that information at hand, and once again, the minority leader is welcome to submit a question, and I will be more than happy to provide the information.
Follow-up minority.
I'm flabbergasted. Madam Presiding Officer, can the Secretary also indicate what is the process? Because what I understand about procurement is that you must have before you procure. But here we are seeing events happening where perhaps funding is. So what is the process in terms of identifying funding and payment? What is the correlation between funding and payment? Because if you have your funding, then you should have no problem paying. So is it that they don't have the funding?
One question, please, minority.
The question is it that they don't have the funding and they are planning programs without funding? It's a question.
Councillor Boris.
Have the funding?
The usual process is that an executive council note is prepared that outlines the event and the estimated cost to produce the event. That executive council note is approved, and when that executive council note is approved, then request for releases can be made. As I indicated earlier, for the Carnival in February, we have paid out $7.6 million to date. There is an outstanding balance that we are working to clear at this time because we have to request releases to cover that outstanding balance.
Follow-up minority.
Madam Presiding Officer, so if I understand what was said, you carry an executive council note, it's approved. So I am here, Madam Presiding.
Members, please.
Madam
Minority,
Presiding,
please.
I'm understanding
Question?
that the budget was about 10 million, so that would have been approved. You would have requested $10 million. So why we are now in June?
Question, minority.
The Carnival was February. Why have not the division gotten the release so that the people who would have supplied services can be paid? These are poor people.
Question?
Why, after getting the approval and requesting the release for the $10 million, why haven't you got it in a place where you can now pay? It's now June, Carnival was in February. These are poor people who have provided
Thank
service.
you, minority. Councillor Boris.
I'm not sure if it's fair for me to answer that question, Madam Presiding Officer, but I will attempt to do so. The division has done all that it is supposed to do in terms of requesting releases in a timely manner. We are not responsible for any delays that may result from situations outside of our control at the division. I will continue to repeat to the minority leader that we have already paid out $7.6 million. We have a small balance to cover in terms of February Carnival, and as soon as those monies are available, those payments will be made.
Question 72, minority leader.
Question 72 to the Secretary of Infrastructure, Quarries and Urban Development.
Secretary James.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. It is always a pleasure to come to this House, to be able to contribute to the governance of the island that I love so much. Madam Presiding Officer, the question reads, can the Secretary identify and list the current members of the board of the Quarry at Studley Park, as well as their position, remuneration, and date of appointment? Madam Presiding Officer, in 2017, the Quarry, that is the mining operations of the then DIQE at Studley Park, the aggregate crushing operations, the asphalt manufacturing operations, the equipment rental operations, and the testing lab unit of the DIQE at Goldsboro were all consolidated into one corporate entity incorporated under the Companies Act of 1995 as Studley Park Enterprises Limited, commonly called SPEL. Madam Presiding Officer, I do not believe that someone writes the members' questions and that he is just someone else's puppet.
Madam
So I am certain.
This is out of place, out of order, out of order.
Minority Leader,
Madam Presiding Officer,
Please.
the question is
have
clear.
your seat, please. Continue, Mr. James.
I will reread the question just to make it clear. Can the Secretary identify? Madam Presiding Officer, I'm on my feet. Could I have some quiet? The question reads, can the Secretary identify and list the current members of the board of the Quarry at Studley Park? The board of the Quarry at Studley Park.
You do have a quarry at Studley Park?
I'll come to that.
You have a board?
Members,
I will come to that.
members, I would like to hear the response from Secretary James, please. Secretary James, can you please answer the question?
Madam Presiding Officer, every time I come to this house, I attempt to give the answer to the question as it is written. And it is not in me to try to understand the question in any other way than it is written. So as I said, the quarry, that is the mining operations of the then DIQE at Studley Park, the aggregate crushing operations, the asphalt manufacturing operations, the equipment rental operations, and the testing lab unit, which was at Goldsboro, were all consolidated into one corporate entity called SPEL in 2017. Madam Presiding Officer, I want to go slowly because this member seems to have severe challenges with the English language. I don't believe, Madam Presiding Officer.
Members, the next person that interrupts, I'm fully aware. I know that you all are aware of the standing orders. Interruptions, number 44 is one of them. I won't have it. Secretary James, kindly answer the question.
If I will be allowed, Madam Presiding Officer, I will present the answer. I don't believe, Madam Presiding Officer, that the member for Darrell Spring whim that someone writes his questions. So I'm certain that he is fully aware of the existence of SPEL as a state enterprise because the member submitted questions for written responses on September 22nd, 2022, sitting of the House as follows. As it relates to the directors, the board of directors at Studley Park Enterprises Limited, can the Secretary indicate the present composition of the board, outlining all directors, independent and otherwise, their roles and functions, and their remuneration packages as at 31st of the 8th, 2022. Then, for the October 27th, 2022 sitting of the House, the Mandatory Councillor Benoit submitted the following question for oral answer. In relation to the written responses given regarding the composition and the remuneration of the SPEL board, can the Secretary indicate the guiding authority that informed the remuneration package for the then executive directors and independent directors? Therefore, Madam Presiding Officer, I am not certain if this question before me today is some sleight of words, but simply The answer to this question is that the quarry, that is the mining operations at Studley Park, does not have a board on its own. Also, Madam Presiding Officer, given the actions of the learned member for Darrell Spring Whim in this House, I would ask that if the member wants to ask about the board of the directors of the Studley Park Enterprises Limited, that being a separate altogether question, that he is welcome to submit that question at the next sitting or at any other sitting he chooses, and I'll be pleased to answer. Also, Madam Presiding Officer, because of my uncertainty as to the question that is being asked, I am tending to think that the minority leader, the member for Darrell Spring Whim, is confused as to the quarry at Studley Park, and he's probably referring to the other quarry at Studley Park, who used to be operated by his good friend, that was on state lands.
Thank you, Assemblyman James.
Madam President, I'm not finished my answer, respectfully.
I advise all members that I am not going to allow any interruptions while the question segment is going on. Minority, do you have a follow-up question?
Madam Presiding Officer, there is only one board, one quarry that the state has responsibility for at Studley Park. And no dancing, no shenanigans, no hiding can take away from the fact.
May I have your question, Minority?
The question is clear. The board that the Secretary of Infrastructure has control of, that is in Studley Park Quarry, we want to know who are the directors. So whether the board, the name of the company is spelled, or whether the name of the company is well. We just simply want to know who are the directors and what is so difficult. What is so difficult? Why are you hiding?
Thank you, Minority. Assemblyman James.
I didn't get a question in that little rant.
For clarity, Minority.
The question is so simple. The board at the quarry of Studley Park that the state has control over, we simply want to know who are the directors of that board, whether notwithstanding the official name, we know there's one board that the state has control of at Studley Park Quarry, and we simply want to know who are the directors. Why are you hiding?
Assemblyman James.
Madam Presiding Officer, some of my family members are teachers, and I've been told that we all learn as children from repetition. So I'll repeat the question as it is written so that the minority leader, I wouldn't even get into the fact with the meaning of the word can and will and should and would. I will just read that. In fact, let me just answer the question.
Thank you.
There is no board of a quarry at Studley Park. There is a board of spell, and if the minority leader wishes to ask a question about the board of spell, which he has asked before, then he can write the question, oral or written, and I will be delighted to answer him at that time.
Follow-up, Minority.
Madam Presiding Officer, please note that this matter will be taken to the privileges because there is a board at the quarry at Studley Park, and this member is misleading the House deliberately not to tell all of Tobago who are the members of the board of Studley Park Quarry that he has control over. So this matter is now going to be placed to the consideration of the privileges committee.
Question 73, Minority Councillor.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. Question number 73 to the Secretary, Division of Tourism, Culture, Antiquities and the Transportation, Councillor Tashia Boris.
Councillor Boris.
Further to question 33 for written response at the 11th sitting, which was partly answered. Can the Secretary provide an update on the total expenditure to date for the Tobago Carnival in October 2022, giving a breakdown of the total amount paid to suppliers, as well as any amount outstanding or unpaid commitments? As it relates to the total expenditure to date for the Tobago Carnival in 2022, this expenditure has totaled $10,169,125.50 from the Tobago Festivals Commission Limited. The amount paid to date to suppliers from this organization is $10,152,250,000.58. So let me repeat, $10,152,250.58 paid to suppliers, and there's an outstanding balance of $16,875. And I have an entire list of persons who have been paid from the Festivals Commission for that Tobago October Carnival. Further to this, from the Tobago Tourism Agency Limited, a total of $2,155,000 was spent to date, and they have no unpaid balances or outstanding commitments. Therefore, based on the expenditure from both the Festivals Commission and the Tobago Tourism Agency, the entire cost to host the October 2022 Tobago Carnival was $12,660,505.50.
Follow-up, Minority Councillor.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. Madam Presiding Officer, the Secretary indicated that there was a small outstanding balance. Can the Secretary indicate why is that balance still outstanding? And when will it be paid?
Councillor Boris.
Madam Presiding Officer, I can't say exactly why that balance is outstanding, but I know that the Festivals Commission is awaiting fourth quarter releases, and I do anticipate that once they receive those releases, that balance will be cleared.
Follow-up, Minority Councillor. Question 81, Minority Councillor.
Question 81 to the Secretary of Community Development, Youth Development and Sport, Assemblyman Terence Baines.
Assemblyman Baines.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. The question as posed in relation to the 2023 Commonwealth Games, which will be hosted in Tobago, can the Secretary list the sporting disciplines and or activities which will take place on the island and indicate the level of preparedness of the Assembly for each discipline and or activity? Madam Presiding Officer, the government of Trinidad and Tobago won the bid to host the Commonwealth Youth Games. And the hosting was complicated, as you can appreciate, by the COVID pandemic. However, the process was renewed, and Trinidad and Tobago will, in fact, host these games. The Tobago House of Assembly has leaned forward, and 4 disciplines of the Commonwealth Youth Games will be held here in Tobago. The first is the Fast 5 netball, which will take place at the Shaw Park Complex. The 7-a-side rugby will be hosted at the Shaw Park Recreation Ground. Sprint triathlon will take place at Buku, with the Buku multipurpose facility hosting the changeover and finish. And beach volleyball will take place at the Black Rock Beach Sport Complex. Additionally, Tobago will host the closing ceremony at the Pigeon Point Heritage Park. A players' lounge will be created at the Scarborough Secondary School for rugby players to relax between matches. The Canaan Bonaccord Recreation Ground and the Mount Pleasant Recreation Ground will be used as practice grounds for rugby. The facilities for the young men at the YMCA in Blackrock will also be utilized. The three existing facilities that are being used have numerous maintenance challenges and issues, and we have to, in fact, we are addressing them as we speak to make sure that they are ready for the games. This include, of course, the Shaw Park complex. We have some leaks that require some repairs. There is some installation of and testing of and retrofitting of some of the sport floor that was purchased some 10 years ago by the past regime, but it was never used. Interestingly, the warrant on the floor was for seven years. The neglected drainage system at the Shaw Park field, which has been we're now trying to resuscitate that. The entire area made free of all trip hazards, dangers to the public, and so on. Work is going on apace to have the field ready. There is also the need for the installation of some new sporting lighting. The purchase of sport-related equipment, despite the purchase of the floor at Shaw Park some 10 years ago, no sports equipment, backboards, rings, or scoreboards were ever purchased, which is strange. In making purchase decisions, the THA considered the legacy value of every purchase. While the initial proposals was to rent equipment, the THA firmly believes that hosting of the games in Tobago should provide a fillip to sport, so that when the games are over, our Tobago people must be able to enjoy the same world-class accommodations that we are preparing for our guests. Following the same principle, the THA rejected a plan to create a temporary facility in Pigeon Point for volleyball, and instead we are producing a beach sport facility at the Blackrock area that will accommodate not only beach volleyball but beach tennis, but will also be the only regulation-sized beach soccer field in the country and the only one with the approved silica sand. This sand will be here within 1 week. We are importing the sand from Guyana. And the new Blackrock facility is scheduled to host an international beach volleyball event as a test event for the games, and already the THA has received requests for bookings from soccer event promoters and has garnered interest from Trinidad and Tobago representation on the International Beach Tennis Tour. Madam Presiding Officer, kindly note that in keeping with the modern trends, the environmental sensitivity, and the need to keep the facility flexible for the multiple uses to which it will be put, a single permanent office, equipment storage space, cafeteria, and a washroom with a VIP veranda will be included. All the amenities...
Assemblyman Baines?
Yes?
Had I known your answer would have been this detailed, I would have suggested this for written answers. I think you have answered the question. Minority Councillor.
Madam Presiding Officer, the Secretary did not indicate the preparedness and whether or not the facilities, and I have some follow-up based on the response given by the Secretary.
Can I have the question, please?
The preparedness, he didn't answer the part about the preparedness of the Assembly.
Assemblyman Baines.
Madam Presiding Officer, work is going on apace on all of these surfaces, and it is our conviction that the spaces would be ready for the games.
Follow-up Minority Councillor.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. Madam Presiding Officer, when you visit the website of the Commonwealth Youth Games, you will see that beach volleyball is scheduled for, or the venue is Pigeon Point. And we are aware that there's a process to change the venue based on the contract. The question is, has the Tobago House of Assembly engage in the process to change the venue from Pigeon Point to Blackrock for beach volleyball.
Assemblyman Baines.
Madam Presiding Officer, I have not familiarized myself with what the councillor is referring to, and therefore I don't want to venture there. All I can say is that as the body that is in charge of the governance of Tobago, we saw it fit to have a facility, and notwithstanding that with the damage that has been done to the Pigeon Point space, I know from erosion and so on that it was more sensible to have the games in a different space.
Follow-up minority. Councillor.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. Madam Presiding Officer, I'm a bit concerned by the response from the Secretary of Community Development because there's a contract between the government of Trinidad and Tobago and the Commonwealth Games in terms of hosting these games. And again, if you go to the website of the Commonwealth Youth Games, you will see venues for varying locations. If it is that the venue has to be changed, I am thinking that this should be done in consultation. There is some process. And if the Secretary is not aware, then I think the Secretary needs to take steps.
Can I have the questions, please? Question.
Will the Secretary be taking steps to formally change the venue? And can the Secretary just decide that the venue for the beach volleyball could just be changed like that?
Assemblyman Baines.
Madam Presiding Officer, just a few days ago, representatives from the Commonwealth Games were here with us in Tobago. I met them myself. We had conversations. There was no issue raised as it relates to our process with the readiness and the preparedness of the facility at Blackrock. Therefore, I don't think that this matter is a matter of concern to me.
Unfortunately,
No.
Minority Councillor, those were your 3 follow-up questions. Should you have any questions that you would like to pose to any other members, you can do so in writing for the next sitting of the Assembly. Clerk?
First for leave to move the adjournment of the Assembly on determinate matters of urgent public importance. Statement by secretaries or assistant secretaries.
Leader of Assembly Business.
Madam Presiding Officer, I beg to move that Standing Order 91-1 be used to suspend Standing Orders 29-2 to allow the Chief Secretary and Secretary of Finance, Trade and the Economy to deliver his statement in its entirety. Let me repeat. I beg to move that Standing Order 91-1 be used to suspend Standing Order 29-1 to allow the Chief Secretary and Secretary of Finance, Trade and the Economy to deliver his statement in its entirety. Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer.
(29-2). Leader of Assembly Business. 29-2.
Honorable members, the question put is that Standing Order 91-1 be used to suspend Standing Order 29-2 to have the Chief Secretary and Secretary for Finance, Trade and the Economy to deliver his statement in its entirety. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any against? Chief Secretary, you may begin.
Are you standing on a point of order?
On 29.5, please. Madam Presiding Officer, 29.5 says that a statement made by a member shall be circulated to all members. Madam Presiding Officer, this statement is being made and there is no such paper being circulated. The second challenge I have, it is quite disingenuous that the member will be allowed to misuse the provisions of a statement to deliver a political address. This is a clear abuse
Minority
of the
Leader,
House.
Minority Leader, the statement has not been made yet.
But Madam Presiding Officer, the statement is made so that we can follow and ensure that the Chief Secretary follows the statement. That is the only way we'll know what he's saying is actually on the statement. It should be circulated.
Noted.
So will it be circulated?
Ms. O'Neill? With regards to your point of order, Minority Leader, the statement has to be made first for the circulation to happen. Kindly read the standing order properly. A statement made. Minority Leader, kindly have your seat. Chief Secretary, please continue.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. And thank you, Madam Presiding Officer, for this opportunity to make this broad sectoral statement in the House today. I want this early on to take the opportunity once again, and this time in joining with the rest of the House, to extend sincerest condolences to the family of Dr. Jeff Davidson, who served as chairman of the Tobago House of Assembly, and then as the first presiding officer of the THA in 1996. It must be noted in this House that we are eternally thankful for the roles played by Dr. Davidson in Tobago's long-standing fight for greater autonomy. May his legacy inspire today's generation to fight on and fight harder for what is rightfully Tobago's. This statement, Madam Presiding Officer, comes on the cusp of the annual THA budget, which will be presented in this House on Monday, 26 June 2023 at 10 a.m. The debate on the budget will happen subsequently on Thursday, 29 June 2023, starting at 10 a.m. Essentially, Madam Presiding Officer, this House will sit 3 times this month of June, which will perhaps be the most times the House will sit in a given month since the coming into force of Act 40 of 1996. Today, I'm grateful for my colleagues who have agreed to waive the usual time for a statement to be read in this House, to allow for me to put on the record of the House clear explanations and capital FACTS facts surrounding the matters that the Prime Minister of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago have been deliberately misleading the nation on. I wish to present this statement as a forerunner to the budget presentation next week, so that no time is wasted during that important presentation on dealing with the calculated disinformation campaign being run by those opposite, with the leadership of their puppet masters in Trinidad. And so today, I will uncloak the disinformation campaign against the THA and the people of Tobago, led by the Prime Minister, give a measured update on the now infamous audit reports commissioned by the Tobago House of Assembly, and finally, I will share concerns about the Tobago Autonomy Project that started before the birth of every member present in this House. Madam Presiding Officer, for over a past month, I have been making attempts on a continuous basis to have the post of Chief Administrator filled. And today, we are still without a Chief Administrator. Section 71(4) of the Tobago House of Assembly Act is very clear, which stipulates that prior to consultation with the Public Service Commission on the appointment of the Chief Administrator, the Prime Minister shall consult with the Chief Secretary. Madam Presiding Officer, to understand why we are at this place of uncertainty with a chief administrator and how deadly deceitful the leader of the government of this country is, we must go back to what transpired for the filling of vacancy last year when Mrs. Bernadette Solomon Koroma retired from that position. Madam Presiding Officer, before I do that, I recall as a child in Sabbath school, I was taught that the most deceitful character in the universe is a man called Satan. And then I get to almost the age of 38, and I encountered the Prime Minister, Dr. Keith Christopher Rowley. Last year, on March 10th, 2022, I had cause to pen a letter to the Prime Minister to indicate my displeasure with the fact that a chief administrator was appointed without following precisely the dictates of the law. I wish to read verbatim the letter onto the Hansard records. And in the statement I sent to you, it's labeled as Appendix 1. March 10, 2022, the Honorable Dr. Keith Christopher Rowley, Prime Minister, Office of the Prime Minister, the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, Whitehall, 29 Maraval Road, Sinclair, Port of Spain, Trinidad. Their Prime Minister. According to the Tobago House of Assembly Act 40 of 1996, Section 71(4), prior to consultation with the Public Service Commission on the appointment of the Chief Administrator, the Prime Minister shall consult with the Chief Secretary. Notwithstanding the clear directives in the law, the former Chief Administrator, Ms. Bernadette Solomon Koroma, informed me that one Ms. Ethelyn John had been appointed to act as Chief Administrator prior to any consultation with your good self. She further informed me that this led to Mr. Richard Toppin moving from within the THA to the position of Acting Permanent Secretary within the Office of the Prime Minister, Central Administrative Services, Tobago CAST, and that a new administrator, Mr. Lincoln Nelson, was selected to serve within the THA. Further, I was informed that a formal handover of portfolios happened. All of the above happened by the 28th of February 2022, well in advance of any prior consultation as required by law. Legally and properly, this consultation should have occurred in advance of any appointment on the 28th of February 2022 and the lateral movement within the public service that ensued. It is therefore difficult to view the consultation post the appointment of someone to act as Chief Administrator as anything other than an insult to the office of the Chief Secretary and counterproductive to both of our efforts towards greater autonomy for Tobago. This may very well not be what your office intended, but this is the result of not following the law as prescribed. Nevertheless, I am inclined to a gracious intervention by accepting Ms. John to serve, and I capitalized only on the basis that she worked previously within the THA system as an administrator and thus understands it, and she is qualified for the role being bestowed upon her. However, allow me to place on record that in the future I will decline, publicly object, and seek legal redress should this pattern of appointment of a chief administrator repeat itself. Ms. Ethelyn John has been accepted to act as Chief Administrator, and I will only now formally introduce her to the Tobago public and the public servants within the THA as their lead. Be advised accordingly. Yours sincerely, Farley Chavez Augustine. So, Madam Presiding Officer, Note for the record how I reluctantly accepted the appointment of Ms. Ethelyn John. My first instinct was to go to court and to ask the court to deem the appointment illegal. However, many of the elders in the space advised me that so early in my tenure in office that I should opt for a peaceful outcome instead. Fast-tracked to a little over a year later, a vacancy occurred in this office on May 18th, 2023, when Mrs. Ethelyn John, Chief Administrator, demitted office upon reaching the compulsory retirement age. The Chief Administrator, prior to demitting office, did two things. One, she wrote the Permanent Secretary to the Prime Minister or the Head of the Public Service by letter dated April 17th, 2023, informing him that vacancy was imminent as she was due to retire on May 17th, 2023. In that letter, she also drew the attention of the Permanent Secretary to the requirement of Section 71(4) of the Tobago House of Assembly Act, which stipulates that prior to consultation with the Public Service Commission on the appointment of the Chief Administrator, the Prime Minister shall consult with the Chief Secretary. She asks the Director of the Public, secondly, she asks the Director of Public Administration requesting the order of merit list for position of Chief Administrator. Acquisition of this list would have given the Chief Secretary an opportunity to peruse the list prior to the statutory consultation with the Prime Minister. The list was never provided. I acquired a copy of the letter sent by the Chief Administrator, and I wish to also enter this letter on the records of the House. I will now read this letter verbatim. As you will see in the statement provided to you, Appendix 2. April 17th, 2023, Mr. Maurice Sweet, Permanent Secretary to the Prime Minister, Office of the Prime Minister, Whitehall, 13 to 15 Sinclair Avenue, Sinclair, Trinidad. Dear Mr. Sweet, reference is made to the caption supra. Kindly be informed that Ms. Ethelyn John, Acting Chief Administrator, Tobago House of Assembly, is due to proceed on compulsory retirement from the public service with effect from 17th May 2023. The Tobago House of Assembly Act 40 of 1996, Part 7, Clause 71, 4 states, prior to consultation with the Public Service Commission on the appointment of the Chief Administrator, the Prime Minister shall consult with the Chief Secretary. Submitted for your attention and necessary action. Yours respectfully, Ethelyn John, Chief Administrator, Tobago House of Assembly. Madam Presiding Officer, 2 days prior to the date of the Chief Administrator's departure, in light of no information reaching me about the appointment, and being mindful of the legislative requirement of Section 71(4) of the Tobago House of Assembly Act 1996, which imposes a directional mandate on the Prime Minister to consult with the Chief Secretary prior to the fulfillment of Section 121 of the Constitution. A meeting was sought with the Prime Minister by letter dated May 15th, 2023. I wish to read a significant part of this letter. Part of the letter I will keep redacted until an appointment is made by the Public Service Commission. In the statement provided to you, it's labeled as Appendix 3. And this is to the Prime Minister dated May 15th, 2023. Dear Prime Minister, congratulations on your recent achievement of Honorary Doctor of Letters from Howard University. According to the Tobago House of Assembly Act 40 of 1996, Section 71(4), prior to consultation with the Public Service Commission on the appointment of the Chief Administrator, the Prime Minister shall consult with the Chief Secretary. At this juncture, 2 days away from the retirement of the current Chief Administrator, no such consultation has happened between your good self and me. This letter therefore serves as both a reminder of the legal requirement and an avenue through which I will share my recommendation for the appointment of a new Chief Administrator. Legally and properly, this consultation should happen in advance of any appointment on the 18th of May 2022 or thereafter. Last year, the procedure was improperly handled, and a letter to that effect was sent to your office reminding of the requirement in law and the need to not have history repeat itself. In this regard, I wish to have, name redacted, considered for appointment as Chief Administrator within the Tobago House of Assembly. Attached is the resume. I shall be available for consultation/conversation on the matter at any time mutually convenient. Yours sincerely, Farley Chavez Augustine. Madam Presiding Officer, the letter very clearly stated the date on which the vacancy would occur. It should be noted that this letter was a sequel to the previous appointment of a Chief Administrator 2022, where the appointment was foisted upon the Chief Secretary without any prior notice or consultation whatsoever. It should be noted that the Prime Minister at the time of the appointment last year was actually out of the country. I also want members of this House to carefully note that in the absence of consultation, I made a recommendation to the Prime Minister in writing. Remember that this was the 15th of May 2023. This will become materially important. Madam Presiding Officer, no list of names was presented nor discussed pursuant to said list. There was no indication that anyone was being considered or that there was a recommendation from the Public Service Commission or the Prime Minister's office, or worst of all, that an appointment was made on the 17th of May 2023. Please remember that this meeting with the Prime Minister was held on the 22nd of May 2023. Consequently, Madam Presiding Officer, there was no need for the Chief Secretary to comment on any prospective appointment. The only name discussed in that meeting was that of the recommendation of the Chief Secretary. No other names were brought up. No bad report was given about any public servant in Tobago. I just re-proposed the name that I had written about a week before. During that meeting, no indication was given to the Prime Minister, or given by the Prime Minister, nor the Public Service Commission, that they were considering names. In fact, it came as a shock to me when the Prime Minister returned to the country from Bahamas, I believe, and led the country to believe, through his insinuations and partly vacuous statement, that we might have discussed the name of a senior public servant from caste, and that I did not inform him that there were disciplinary issues with said senior public servant. Madam Presiding Officer, let me be very clear. At no point, and up to this point, the Prime Minister and myself have discussed any other public servant save and except for the one I recommended. In the circumstances surrounding that meeting, I indicated to the Prime Minister a recommendation that I based on the performance of that person as an administrator in the Tobago House of Assembly and felt comfortable with that person as my chief advisor, because that is what the chief administrator represents to the chief secretary. The atmosphere of the meeting conveyed the impression that the Prime Minister was also of the view that it was the Chief Secretary's remit to choose his chief advisor. Subsequent to our meeting on May 22nd, 2023, I reached out to the Prime Minister 1 week later on the 29th of May 2023. And at 7:40 p.m. that evening, he responded by saying, quote, "Good evening. Could you send me the name of the person you suggested and who we agreed upon? I was busy in Parliament today. I will direct the PS on Wednesday." End quote. The day after this exchange was a public holiday. Madam Prime Minister, Madam Presiding Officer, maybe I'm being prophetic. Madam Presiding Officer, I again reached out to the Prime Minister 1 week later on the 5th of June 2023. The Prime Minister responded early in the morning on June 6, 2023 at 12:29 a.m. Quote, "I have been begging to have the Public Service Commission make the appointment that we agreed on. Only today, in brackets Monday, I checked on it. Hopefully very soon." Close quotation. So, Madam Presiding Officer, from my interaction with the Prime Minister, there was an agreement on a recommendation, as is borne out by subsequent communication between the Prime Minister and myself, which I shared with you all today. At this point, I wasn't blaming the Prime Minister for the non-appointment of a chief administrator. I was blaming the Public Service Commission. I was led to believe that the Prime Minister did what he was supposed to do, and we were all waiting on the Public Service Commission. It is for that reason that on the 9th of June 2023, that the THA, through its attorney, served a pre-action protocol letter on the Director of Personnel Administration at the PSC. The Director of Personnel Administration responded on June 15th, and on the second page of that response, the sixth paragraph to be precise, the DPA said the following, and I quote, "The Commission had previously appointed an officer to act as Chief Administrator from May 17, 2023, subject to consultation as provided for in the Constitution. Thereafter, the Commission was notified by the then Chief Administrator to Tobago House of Assembly by letter dated May 17, 2023 of a report of allegations of misconduct against the officer designated for appointment. Upon considering the notification, the Commission on May 24, 2023 decided that the designated officer ceased to report for duty." Close quotation. Now, this is alarming for many reasons. Number one, no officer should be appointed to act as Chief Administrator without prior consultation with the Chief Secretary in accordance with the law. Number two, the Public Service Commission became aware of the allegations, according to them, 5 days before the Prime Minister met with me to have consultation. Number three, the question is, was the Prime Minister made aware of these allegations prior to him meeting with me 5 days later? If no, why not? It was the Public Service Commission's duty to inform the Prime Minister of such, not mine. So this talk about me not giving the Prime Minister a report is hogwash. Further, let me inform the public that the first officer that was given a copy of the final audit report that triggered the suspension of the senior officer was the former Chief Administrator, Ms. Ethelyn John. She was given the report months earlier. It is up to the sole discretion of the Chief Administrator, after reading the voluminous report, to sanction or cause to be sanctioned any public officer that was implicated in that report. That is not my duty and business, Madam Presiding Officer. The Chief Administrator laid the allegations based on the report to the Public Service Commission, and the Public Service Commission found enough merit to suspend the said officer. I am nowhere in that line of authority. But given the noises in the space, Madam Presiding Officer, I must question whether or not the Prime Minister and his friends wanted to have that senior public officer installed as Chief Administrator without consulting me. Further, I must question whether the desire to have this officer in question become Chief Administrator is to have someone who will thwart the results or the resolutions of the audit and ensure that no one pays for the crimes committed against the THA. I believe this is a firm plot to save the friends of the Prime Minister. At this point, the protracted vacancy in the office of Chief Administrator negatively affects the timeliness of treating with human resource matters in the THA. By legal notice number 105, the Public Service Commission Delegation of Powers Amendment Order 2006, the Public Service Commission delegated authority to the Chief Administrator and the THA to exercise certain powers with regards to public officers up to range 68 on behalf of the Public Service Commission. These include to appoint persons on recruitment from outside the civil service in a temporary capacity to an office in the Tobago House of Assembly, to appoint a public officer to act in a public office in the civil service, Tobago House of Assembly for periods up to 6 months, whether such acting appointment is in a vacant office or not, and in respect of such powers, the Chief Administrator shall apply the principles of selection prescribed in regulations 1824 and 26 and the provisions of regulation 25 of the regulation. Also, the Chief Administrator is delegated powers to transfer a public officer from an office in a grade in the Tobago House of Assembly to which such an officer is assigned to a similar office in that grade within the Tobago House of Assembly with no alteration in his remuneration, which power shall be exercised by the Chief Administrator subject to the provisions of Regulation 29. And in the absence of a Chief Administrator, Madam Presiding Officer, no one can fulfill this function. The morale of public officers whose human resource matters are not being dealt with timelessly would undoubtedly be negatively affected. Without a Chief Administrator, THA deeds cannot be executed. The leadership and coordination for the fulfillment of the legislative requirements of the Public Procurement and Disposal of Public Property Act is delayed. Public officers like game wardens and the security at Inland Revenue and the cash services at Finance who are firearms users, employee certificate holders, cannot operate with firearms, forcing the THA to spend extra monies on private precepted security guards. And before I move on from the matter of Chief Ad, let me educate the public in telling them that Chief Administrator is not necessarily the most senior public servant. It is not an automatic appointment. If it were, there will be no requirement to consult the Chief Secretary. And in the Tobago space, every Chief Secretary except Hochoy Charles, who had to accept the transfer of the Clerk of the House into the position of Chief Administrator, was consulted in a purposive manner, and their recommendations for Chief Administrator accepted. However, when it comes to this Chief Secretary, there seemed to be an intent to do otherwise. Let me warn, however, let no man despise my youth. And this brings me to the audit report that is clearly the cause of all this disinformation. It is why they have slandered my name concerning the selection of a chief administrator, so that they can install who they want as chief administrator. I brought to this house preliminary findings of the audit report, and I indicated then that there were some steps to be taken before the report is finalized. In my statement to the House then, I did not call the names of any of the contractors involved in the audit. In fact, those contractors called themselves out. Since then, we have had the final report. We have sought and received sound legal advice on how to proceed. One contracted officer has been fired owing to the findings of the report. One public officer has been suspended owing to the findings of the report. The offenses highlighted in the report were forwarded to the offices, and I need you to listen carefully, to the offices of the Commissioner of Police, the Fraud Squad, the Financial Investigation Unit, or FIU, the now highly anticipated Anti-Corruption Bureau, and the Director of Public Prosecution. So far, only the Fraud Squad has responded. Learning from the historical lessons of the Scott drug report, I was probably a little baby at that time, 80s, still in nappy. Right up to land date, I will not be making the report public, nor will I be laying it in the House, and I will not be giving a copy to the minority, nor the Prime Minister. This report will be needed to advance civil and criminal court matters, and I will not want those culpable to get away on a technicality. As Lande did. Madam Presiding Officer, it will appear that those opposite will like the opportunity to capital WAR1 their friends and to have the report thrown out of court on a technicality. As the line secretary responsible for the report, I have not even given members of the executive copies. A literal handful of public servants who shall remain nameless at this point have been privy to the report, and it's under lock and key. I will ensure, despite efforts to intimidate, drive fear, telling untruths, to defame my character, to extort that those responsible for stealing from the THA purse be held accountable. And Madam Presiding Officer, they will be held accountable in the same manner, in the same way that those responsible for the Piarco Airport fiasco are being held accountable now. Madam Presiding Officer, the actions listed above with the audit report has intensified the efforts from Trinidad to interfere in the governance of Tobago. Perhaps, now with the passing of Dr. Davidson, every Tobagonian should read his book on Tobago, on PNM versus Tobago. It has always been PNM versus Tobago. It has always been that way. Now that they were pushed out of the corridors of power in Tobago, they have been doing everything possible and impossible to disrespect Tobagonians, to disrespect the THA and its elected officials, and to disrespect the laws governing the Tobago House of Assembly. They, in the most hypocritical fashion, have been trying to delay and destroy every development gain on the island. And that's why today, in the memory of Dr. Jeff Davidson, we must make a Dr. Davidson pledge to fight on. And so tomorrow, we will respectfully, at least this side, show up and give Dr. Davidson a hero's burial. But the day after that, know that we are ready for the fight. Tobago's autonomy must be protected on all counts, and Tobago and Tobagonians will stand up and make those opposite and our friends, families, and at last the enemies across the waters respect the institution that is the Tobago House of Assembly. Allow me to reiterate in closing, this THA will see the audit report and the actions to be taken to its fullest extent. We will carefully dot our I's and cross our T's. Yes. We will take every action possible against those who are culpable. Chiefad or no chiefad, it will happen. Yes. And so, Madam Presiding Officer, we greatly anticipate the budget presentation that will happen on Monday and the debates to follow on Thursday, when Tobagonians will get a glimpse, in fact more than a glimpse, but a detailed report on the progress of Tobago and how progressive their administration has been over the past year and a half. Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer.
Personal explanation, introduction of bills, motion relating to the business or sitting of the Assembly, moved by Secretary or Assistant Secretary. Public business, motion for adjournment.
Leader of Assembly business.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. Madam Presiding Officer, before I adjourn, permit me to make a correction to an error made when I laid the papers previously. it should be that I stand to move that the monthly budget report as at the end of April and not May 2023 be laid on behalf of the Chief Secretary and Secretary of Finance, Trade and the Economy.
Noted.
Madam Presiding Officer, I now beg to move that this House stands adjourned to Monday 26th June 2023 for the budget statement of the Tobago House of Assembly.
Members, the question is that this House now stands adjourned until Monday, 26 June. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any against? This House now stands adjourned to Monday, 26 June. Good afternoon, members.
Time for the 18th sitting of the 2021 to 2025 session of the Tobago House of Assembly. Area Representative for Darrell Spring Wim, Kelvin Morris, will lay a motion based on the position that on March 23rd, the 15th sitting was adjourned based on the advice that the House could not be convened in the clerk's absence. The minority leader maintains that this was in violation of the standing orders and a flagrant breach of the law. The motion will call on the House to conduct an investigation into the circumstances surrounding the issue. Even before we get into the debate, there's highly anticipated questions for oral and written answers. This Thursday, May 25th from 1:30 p.m., we head back to the House for the 18th sitting of the 2021 to 2025 session of the Tobago House of Assembly. As usual, you have only two options. You can either come in or tune in. Either way, just don't miss it.
Let us now pray. Almighty God, as we have come together to begin our meeting of the Assembly, we humbly beseech you to grant to all our members the light and guidance of your Holy Spirit, that we may wisely take counsel together and come to such decisions as shall promote your glory and the well-being of all our citizens in this our land, so that peace and happiness, truth and justice may be enjoyed by all people. Grant this for the sake of Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Members, you may be seated.
Oath of allegiance of a new member. Announcements by the presiding officer.
Honorable members, I have received requests for leave of absence from today's sitting from Assemblyman Nigel Tate, Member for Signal Hill Patience Hill, Councillor Tashira Boris, Assemblyman Trevor James, Member for Scarborough Mongrace. The leaves are granted.
Assembly bills sent back from Cabinet. Assembly laws brought back from Parliament, petitions, papers.
Leader of Assembly Business.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. I stand to lay the following papers for Tobago House of Assembly monthly budget report as at the end of January 2023, Tobago House of Assembly monthly budget report as at the end of February 2023, and Tobago House of Assembly monthly budget report as at the end of March 2023.
Presentation of reports from Dispute Resolution Commission, select committees. Chief Secretary's questions. Questions to secretaries.
Leader of Assembly Business.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. Madam Presiding Officer, there are 11 questions for oral and 13 questions for written responses. The executive is prepared to answer questions or oral answers number 56, 57, 59, 62, 65, and 74. And we are requesting that questions number 54, 63, 64, 72, and 73 for oral answers to be deferred to the next sitting due to the absence of the secretaries from today's sitting. Questions number 66, 67, 70, and 71 for written responses should be circulated in the minutes from the last sitting. However, we are requesting to have questions number 60, 68, and 69 for written responses to be deferred due to the absence of the secretaries. Questions for written response number 77 is attached to the minutes from the last sitting and would be circulated at this sitting. However, questions number 75, 76, 78, 79, and 80 would be submitted for circulation at the next sitting. Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer.
Minority Leader.